This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Today's show starts with David Schemm, Kansas Farm Service Agency State Executive Director, as he highlights what deadlines are approaching in August and how producers can use the Livestock Indemnity Program. For the next two segments, K-State's A.J. Tarpoff, Emma Briggs, and Keith Harmoney discuss if cattle on pasture need shade. They break down their thoughts on if there's any benefit to the production of cattle on pasture. The group also touches on how shade structures, man-made or natural, could impact soil and pasture health. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show hearing from the State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. David, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. And it's be nice when we get a little bit of cooler weather. I know we've already entered into the August time frame, and fall's getting closer, but maybe not soon enough with these triple-digit temperatures we're still seeing.
And with these super hot temperatures, anything that you're seeing livestock producers asking about?
Absolutely, Shelby. And unfortunately, like I said, when we get these extreme temperatures, it can get really hard on a lot of the livestock out there. And that's one of the programs that FSA has to help our producers out there is the Livestock Indemnity Program, or LIP program. Basically, it compensates producers for when they have a loss of livestock due to an event. You know, Shelby, it can be because of a result of like a wildfire, but also this heat is a qualifying event when it reaches certain temperatures there, you know, between the daytime temperature and even the nighttime temperature when it doesn't cool off. So when producers, if you experience livestock, and I know it's fair time, even at the fair, we can get these extreme temperatures are very hard on livestock and feedlots. But that's what the Livestock Indemnity Program is for, is when you have a loss of livestock there because of a qualifying heat event like this is there. Biggest thing I would tell people, Shelby, is that if they do experience a loss of livestock, get into the county office and report it. It's kind of the key thing that they'll need to know is have an inventory count and verification, kind of go through that process there to try to help our producers there as we kind of weather through these hot temperatures that we're experiencing right now.
So, David, is this another aspect where if this does happen on their operation, they really need to document it so when they do go into those offices, they have everything prepared?
Absolutely, Shelby. Again, from an FSA standpoint, we'll need some type of inventory count or verification there. You know, a lot of times producers, we all tend to most people carry some type of camera on their phone. They can take pictures. That's always something, basic documentation that helps those producers verify that there. So offices, we definitely more than we'll work with producers with whatever records they have. But that documentation is definitely key. Again, they have some time. They will have some choices depending upon, when they want to report and what possible kind of pricing program they have. Shelby, there was changes in the Working Families Tax Cut Act, or some people know it by One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There were some changes to the LIP program in there. They gave some producers some choices between kind of a regional pricing or taking a 2025 pricing or even a 2026 pricing, depending upon needing their payment and what marketing year they're wanting to based upon there. So the best thing to do, again, talk to the local office, have that inventory count there. They can kind of discuss and go through the options that a producer has.
As we have entered August, what is a deadline that comes up at the end of this month?
We've got a lot of deadlines coming up here. We're just closing out here our county committee nomination period here at the 1st of August. Mid-August, we are going to be closing out the final stages of Supplemental Disaster Relief Program. The one I kind of want to do highlight there, particularly for our landowners there, Shelby, is the base acre update that's due at the end of the month there. So by now, most landowners should have gotten either an email or a postcard in the mail basically wanting to know if they want to opt into those base acres or not there. Might be a few decisions they need to make based upon if they had following a subsequent crop that they had planted to choose which crop they want those base acres in. But the one thing I do want to reassure everybody that if that postcard is not responded to, we will automatically assume you do want to opt in for those additional base acres. So it's more than anything for producers and landowners to opt out. Again, any questions, definitely contact the local office on that deadline here at the end of August.
And David, as you've been the state executive director for this term, you've done some traveling around the state. And where did you recently head off to?
No, absolutely, Shelby. And, I'm always that type of person there. I like to get out firsthand and sit down across the table, visit with our employees, our county committees, members, kind of understand what the challenges and dynamics they've got going on with FSA offices. So that's been a high goal of mine to get out to all of our county offices across the state. We have 96 county offices across the state. And here just this last week, I was able to get around to north central Kansas for FSA. It's our second district, our District 2 county offices there, and visit with our employees and our county committees there. I tell you what, Shelby, it's a great time there. It gives you perspective of the challenges that the employees and county committees are working through and they're seeing for their area there. Always good to visit with them and learn how we can be better and more efficient at delivering our programs out there and helping our producers in each of these counties.
When you're looking at sharing information from that state office to these different districts, how does that really work?
Well, we are in constant communication, email, phone calls. I'm talking with them all the time. We also have district directors, and we also have what we call management or senior leadership conferences that we bring in employees from the county office of Shelby into our state office to be able to talk and go through various program changes that national office has there. So to me, Shelby, it's really about that communication in any way and all ways that we can utilize now with that there. So, but it's really a good system that works well, that we communicate with the district directors and they work with the county directors within their district and helping us to deliver the programs there. Again, a focus of mine, Shelby, is for me very much to get out there and hear firsthand so that I can make sure we can make changes at a state level or for sure communicate it to the national office at ways that we can do even a better job of delivering these programs to our producers.
And while you're in those districts, do you get to interact with some producers?
Oh, absolutely, and that's always a great thing. And of course, our county committee, they are producers there themselves, so it's good, and it's good to hear the challenges that they're facing. It's good to talk to them, talk about how the crops are looking, but also what they see in the area and the general attitude of producers there. And of course, our employees are constantly interacting with the producers there, and they can definitely share that perspective there. It's always good to listen to the producers, and that's one of the highlights for me, Shelby, is to be able to listen to them.
As you visit these different districts, do you see them have a different focus on different aspects of agriculture just based on what's most popular in their district?
Absolutely, Shelby. That's what kind of the neat thing is about it. There is common challenges that our offices have across the state or common items that they work on there, but there's also nuances with that. To develop what I'm talking about, I'll put the example of CRP. By far, our counties with the most acreages of CRP, and it is a high workload for them, is when we start talking about Western Kansas and Southwest Kansas. Those offices deal with a lot of CRP and a lot of CRP acreage. But ironically, Shelby, it's actually back in Eastern Kansas that many of those offices have more CRP contracts in a county there. So in other words, there is a lot of small parcels of CRP in the eastern counties there. Again, those counties are all dealing with the various, CRP implementation management practices, working with their producers on the appropriate management practices, again, which differ between the areas there. But from even a workload and handling it, it's a lot of work for our Western offices to deal with large acreage and large signups there, but also our Eastern offices deal with just a lot of producers with a lot of small acreages. So it's that commonality that they all have, Shelby, but yet very different. And that's what's been the great thing for me as I've gotten to be able to get out and visit with our producers there, is that common thread of a lot of producers that deal with a lot of the same thing: rain, no rain, severe storms, various things like that, but also nuances to the various areas.
So for the Farm Service Agency team, as we look at August and through the end of 2026, what's coming up?
Well, again, like I mentioned, we will be having the base acre update. Again, we have new reference prices. So as we look into October, when RPLC contracts are sent out and payments are issued there, updated reference prices will be in effect for those producers as we're looking through there. We wrapped up CRP for the this year, for sign up for this year, and we're moving forward and working with those producers on the conservation plans with them. So still continues to be a busy time as we finish implementing portions of the Working Family Tax Cut Act. And obviously, I think like everybody else, we're eagerly awaiting a new farm bill and see what that holds for us.
David, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely, Shelby. Thank you.
That was State Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, David Schemm. As always, if you're looking to find more information from the Farm Service Agency, you can do so by heading over to your local service center or by going online to Farmers.gov. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing shade for cattle and pastures with K-State Extension Beef Veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff, K-State Extension Beef System Specialist Emma Briggs, and K-State Range Scientist Keith Harmoney. A.J., Emma, Keith, I appreciate you all taking the time to join us today.
You bet.
Yeah, howdy there. Thanks for having us on.
To start off, A.J., do cattle and pastures really need shade?
That's kind of a loaded question, but I'll try to answer it. Do all pastured cattle need access to shade every day of the year? And the answer is no. If the question is phrased that way, the answer is no. But when it comes to the summer months, are there some potential benefits of having shade or shade access for cattle during grazing? There are some potential benefits, but I'll be the first one to admit that a lot of the research that's been done has been done either overseas, grazing dairy scenarios, things like that, that don't necessarily overlap with our beef cattle at Kansas. Now, research is, hopefully will be done into the future where we have better economic parameters and overall productivity of utilizing shade. But if we look at the basic behavior of those animals during the heat stress days that we've seen, especially the past few weeks here in the state and throughout the Great Plains, there are some potential days and periods of time that we can alleviate heat stress, get those negative behaviors associated with coping with heat stress, and get those animals grazing more, producing more, whether it's a pound a gain, whether it's producing milk, whether it's growing a fetus for a gestational cow. So do cattle need shade? Well, there's some potential benefits. Is it worthwhile in every situation, in every location? Probably not in reality.
And AJ, you're more on the eastern part of the state and Emma more on the western part. And Emma, do you see any value as conditions are a little bit different on the sides of the state?
No, I think AJ really hit it on the nose, right? A lot of people, there's some common misconceptions where, if you're really hot, and you want to get out from the heat, do your cattle also need to be out of the heat? And the answer is generally not, right? Not necessarily. We want to care for the welfare of the animals, but a lot of times cattle are made for this, right? This is where they belong. So, but I think making sure that if you do provide a shade, right, that it's in a very strategic manner in whatever fashion that is, and make sure that the structures or whatever you have good airflow and they're not too small or too cramped.
So to that point on size, I think it'd be really important to bring up about size of shade structure, at least for artificial shade. And grazing cattle, very different scenario than feedlot cattle. But for grazing animals, we really want to try to allocate at least 25 square feet of shade space on the ground for those animals to be able to utilize. And it's like, 25 square feet, that's a lot. Well, in reality, it's not. It's not much different than a 4x8 sheet of plywood for each animal underneath that shade. So the structures, obviously, Kansas is very, unique with our high winds and some of those scenarios. We get weather, so they do need to be robust. While there's not a perfect design that fits every scenario, there are some commercially available, products that can be moved and can be mobile, or at least semi-mobile if you have the right equipment. But they should be equipped with the proper bases to be able to keep them sturdy, especially in some of our windy conditions. Some of the available shade structures even have a base of 7,000 pounds. So if you have a heavy loader or a wheel loader, something along those lines, or if it's placed on some type of sled to be able to move in different locations, so cattle don't erode or degrade some of that pasture. The other thing to consider is elevation. Emma, you mentioned elevation, which is a great piece, but you can also use elevation of shade structures to minimize your material costs. If you put elevated shade or shade structure at an increased rate, well, the higher it is, the more shade actually appears on the ground, and it moves in orientation as the sun rises and sets. So those are all things that you can use to your advantage, where it won't degrade the grass and the environment, but could potentially provide some of that relief in certain times in certain locations.
If someone has decided they want to make a man-made shade structure for their pasture cattle, does that shade structure need to be within a certain distance of maybe water or mineral?
So that's one great piece of a location of the shade. If it's mobile, you can be able to utilize it to help with some of your grazing distribution. So it can be another tool in the toolbox that you can utilize where animals will use them at certain times of the day, usually during the mid-afternoon hours. But if you want animals to be able to control access to certain grazing locations, you can utilize shade along with mineral sites and water sites to be able to spread and get a more even distribution.
I agree with AJ. I think University of Nebraska-Lincoln just put out a grazing study where they were looking at location of shade of the shade in a proportion to how close the water is. I think they had slightly smaller pastures than what we'd really see out here in western Kansas. But I think it got some good maybe preliminary data in there where they saw there was really no difference in how much the cattle use the shade in terms of how far it was from water. The cattle just like to use it if they wanted to.
Emma mentioned something very important there, and that was the size of the pastures were rather small in that study. And, that's something we see with feedlot cattle as well. One of the main ways that cattle in the summertime stay cool is by maintaining airflow around their body. And they're able to get in the landscape and find where they can get the most prevailing wind to try to keep that airflow. Well, cattle that are confined in a feedlot or cattle that are in a small pasture, they're not able to go out and use the landscape to find where that airflow is best to keep their body cool. So that's an important piece that Emma just brought up there about the size of the pasture. Another thing is that, with confined cattle in feedlots, they usually have no vegetation on the floor of the pen that they're in. And, solar radiation hitting that soil, heating that soil up, then reflects back up on the animal. Cattle in pasture, if it's a pasture that's maintained in good health and condition, should have a good vegetative cover on it. And that vegetative cover is not going to absorb the heat and reflect the heat back like a bare soil will. And so cattle on pasture should tend to have a cooler environment all the way around compared to cattle that are confined because of the airflow and also because of being able to avoid that heat that would be radiating back up from a bare soil situation.
And that bare soil can reach, in a feedlot scenario on bare dirt, can get upwards to 140 degrees during peak times during the summer months. We can feel that whenever we walk through dirt lot environments. We can feel that. It's almost like walking across a parking lot. You feel that radiant heat that's been absorbed from solar radiation. While I haven't personally taken some of those temperature samples of a grazing scenario, but even bedding in a feedlot, we can reduce that pen floor temperature by 25 degrees. It's a very similar response in a pasture setting where the environmental just radiant heat, the absorption rate is so much lower in a grazing scenario versus a dirt lot. It's a great point, Keith.
Keith, if a producer is putting man-made mobile structures out in their pasture for cattle because they want them to have shade, how often do they need to be making sure they're moved so that they're not creating issues when it comes to soil quality or soil nutrients?
Well, one of the main things that would happen that we see from immobile shade, such as trees in a pasture, is those areas end up getting trampled rather heavily. A lot of foot traffic. That opens up the canopy. It basically denudes it of vegetation so that there's no cover there, no vegetative cover. And then when the solar radiation does hit that area, it can make that area hot again, right? So those areas do need to be moved so that you maintain vegetative cover. How often that is really depends on probably what your amount of traffic is going to be, but you want to maintain a vegetative cover out there. And, having exposed soil is going to open that up then for siltation and sedimentation of ponds or streams if the shade happens to be close to those. It also opens it up for erosion in case of a large rain event. If it's not near any of those, if it's not near a pond or a stream, you can still get some erosion running down a hillside. So you just want to make sure that you're moving those often enough that you're maintaining a vegetative cover.
That was K-State range scientist Keith Harmoney, and he was joined by K-State Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff and K-State Extension beef systems specialist Emma Briggs as they discussed if cattle out on pasture need shade. We aren't done with this conversation, as we will round out the rest of today's show by wrapping up our conversation with A.J., Emma, and Keith on this topic. If you are reaching your destination and aren't going to be able to hear the rest of today's show, you can always find it on agtoday.net or by searching for Agriculture Today on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to read more on this topic, you can do so by checking out a recent publication by the three titled Do Cattle Need Shade on Pasture? I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can also find it by going to the K-State Extension bookstore. We're now cutting to that short break. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we conclude our show by concluding our conversation with K-State range scientist Keith Harmoney, K-State Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff, and K-State Extension beef systems specialist Emma Briggs as we continue talking about shade for cattle in pastures. If you missed the first part of our segment, you can go back and listen to it on agtoday.net. Keith, if cattle producers are thinking, oh, I have trees out on my pasture, so I should be good to go, is there something you would like to caution them with?
Well, one of the things about trees and pastures that our Kansas grasslands at one time had very, very few trees on the landscape. And in most instances, you could look for miles and not see a tree on the landscape. They were usually only found on areas that were protected by continually flowing streams so that there was a fuel break from fires, or they were on really steep or rocky outcrop areas of hillsides where there wasn't enough fuel to carry a fire through that area. So those were the main places that trees used to be on the landscape. And so now we're seeing big encroachment of woody vegetation throughout our grasslands in the state of Kansas. And by having shade trees out on the landscape, we are providing a seed source for more tree encroachment. And we know that at the rate that trees are encroaching now, that many of our grassland areas and the functionality of those grasslands is being lost due to this tree encroachment. So allowing shade trees out in those pastures is basically allowing a seed source and enabling those trees to encroach further.
AJ, at the beginning of June, we mentioned a few reminders when it comes to heat stress. So while we are still in summer, any reminders for livestock producers?
I guess a few simple reminders. Water, water, water. Keeping a close, if you have a tank water system, making sure that you are checking it, especially in peak heat conditions and heat load where we have multiple days of heat stress, making sure we're checking that water system at least once, if not twice a day, to ensure adequate flow and making sure everything is working as it should. Because an out of water event can be absolutely devastating. Number two is I would highly advise any and all cattle producers to utilize our Animal Comfort Index on the Kansas Mesonet service. So within the Mesonet, if you go to agriculture and then to animal comfort, not only does it give you up-to-date information every 20 minutes at your relatively local location with our diverse weather stations throughout the state, but it also gives a 7-day forecast using National Weather Service data that takes into account temperature, humidity, wind speed, and solar radiation, so we have a better understanding of how cattle are interacting with the environment. So never forget about water, and make sure that you're keeping a keen eye on the forecast so you can implement any plans prior to those events occurring.
Yeah, I think one more thing to add on to AJ's is on top of water, which is the most important nutrient, right, is also the fact of avoid moving or reduce movement of animals during this hot time. And if you do have to move them, try to keep it in that cool morning time or late in the evening once the sun starts going down, where animals can kind of get out of that direct heat.
AJ, Keith, Emma, I appreciate you all taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That was K-State's Emma Briggs, AJ Tarpoff, and Keith Harmoney. Before we cut to a break, we're also going to be joined by K-State's Rich Llewellyn as he reminds us of a few of the breakout sessions that will be taking place at the Risk and Profit Conference August 20th through the 21st.
We've got 28 different sessions going on, and folks would be able to choose from 8 of those. We have some stuff on policy, including government payments for row crops and some SCO and ECO crop insurance payouts. We also have the macroeconomic implications for agriculture by Brian Brigham, price forecasts for both grain as well as inputs like fertilizer and diesel, and then there's some stuff on groundwater, on irrigation that's going on. We have several things going on in western Kansas, particularly related to that. We also have a few livestock topics.
That's what we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.